system is composed of skin, your hair, your nails, sweat glands, oil glands, and mammary glands. The skin is the most visible organ of the body. It's also the largest in surface area. Clinicians tell a lot about your overall health by examining the skin on your body. Skin helps protect you from the environment, and it helps regulate your body temperature.
No, don't take that. That's not yours. Thank
you. Okay. You have cutaneous membrane and you have accessory structures. The cutaneous membrane is your outer surface. This is your epidermis and your dermis. Okay? That's the protective layer on the outside of the integumentary system, your epidermis and your dermis. The accessory structures are your hair follicles, your exocrine glands, and your nails. Okay, we all know exocrine glands excrete where?
Out.
Outside, perfect. Outside the skin. That's your sweat glands, your hair glands, the base glands, and so on. Those are your exocrine glands. Okay. The integumentary is broken down into several functions. Like I said, the functions of the integumentary system. Okay. You can see right up here is your physical protection from environmental hazards, synthesis and storage of lipids, coordination of immune response to pathogens and cancers in the skin, sensory information, synthesis of vitamin D3, excretion, and thermoregulation. Those are the functions, 5 functions of the integumentary system. And it's broken down into 2 main parts, your cutaneous membranes, it's nice being able to point to something, and your accessory structures. Cutaneous membranes are your epidermis and your dermis. Those are the 2 outer layers. The epidermis, which is the outermost layer, that's your squamous cells. That's your keratinized layer. Okay? It protects the dermis, which is underneath the epidermis, from trauma, from chemicals, from pathogens, from dehydration, from drying out, etc. Controls skin permeability, so it prevents water loss, prevents you from dehydrating. You wouldn't rush along the desert without an epidermis that can protect you from losing water. Prevents the entry of pathogens. Okay? For bacteria to enter your body through your skin, it has to penetrate the epidermis, which is a dead, thick layer. It synthesizes vitamin D, vitamin D3. Sensory receptors detect touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. Okay, so think about it. You have all those feelings on the surface of your skin. You can detect touch, you can detect pressure, you can definitely detect pain, and you can detect temperature. Okay? It coordinates the immune response to pathogens and skin cancers. When the skin starts to get assaulted by different or trauma from different things, pathogens, ultraviolet radiation, stuff like that, the skin responds, but it responds to help protect the body and isolate the cancer, whatever is growing. That's why basal cell carcinoma is just got the skin cancer, and it's very well contained. It doesn't spread. So treatment is just cutting it off. It's not malignant in the early stages. The dermis is under the epidermis. The dermis has 2 layers. It has a papillary layer and a reticular layer. Okay? The papillary layer nourishes and supports the epidermis. The epidermis is avascular, no blood vessels. The dermis has blood vessels. That's where the nourishment comes from. Okay? The reticular layer restricts the spread of pathogens that can penetrate your epidermis, stores lipid reserves, lipids are fats, attaches skin to deeper tissue, your connective tissue, and sensory receptors detect the touch, pressure, pain, vibration, and temperature. And your blood vessels assist in thermoregulation. Okay? Allows you to, if the blood vessels constrict, keep away from the surface, heat is maintained, builds up body heat. Blood vessels, the smooth muscles around the blood vessels relax, blood vessels go close to the surface, heat is given off by the body. Okay, so you have the epidermis, then the dermis below it, and the dermis has 2 layers, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Okay? Then we have accessory structures. Accessory structures like your hair follicles, your exocrine glands, and your nails. Hair follicles produce hairs. that protect your skull. Okay. Produce hairs that provide delicate touch sensations on general body surfaces. Okay. If you have a small ant or a real tiny bug crawling on your arm, it's going to crawl over those hairs. Those hairs are going to bend, and you're going to know something's crawling on you. Exocrine glands. Exocrine glands assist in thermal regulation. Exocrine glands excrete sweat. My lights got turned off here. Hold on. Why did my lights get turned off? Let me turn them back on. Oops. There we go. Is that better? I got lights up my room a little bit. All right. So exocrine glands assist in thermal regulation. They secrete a liquid substance, sweat. When the sweat evaporates from your skin, it cools you off. They excrete waste onto the skin surface, and they lubricate the epidermis, keep it from drying out. Nails protect and support the tips of your fingers and your toes. Okay. Cutaneous membrane. Again, we talked about epidermis and the dermis. Epidermis is a superficial epithelium. Superficial means the outside layer. Okay. The dermis. Okay, the dermis is the underlying connective tissue, also known as a subcutaneous layer of superficial fascia. This is not normally considered part of the integument. Okay, you have the epidermis, the dermis, and then your hypodermis. Hypodermis isn't really considered part of it, but that's where you give you injections. That's where the term hypodermic needle comes from. Okay, it's also cutaneous layer, subcutaneous, which is your sub-Q injections. Okay, we just talked through that. You have the epidermis, going through all those different things that it does, and the dermis, the two layers, papillary layer and the reticular layer. Okay. Accessory structures we talked about with your hair follicles, your exocrine glands, which are sweat glands and sebaceous glands. They both secrete different materials. Sweat glands secrete a watery material. Sebaceous glands secrete a mucus material. Sebaceous glands are associated with your hair follicles. That's that oily secretion you get along the hair. It helps protect it. You also have nails, and you have what's called the erector pili muscles. The erector pili muscles attach the hair follicle to the hypodermis. When the erector pili muscle contracts, it produces goosebumps. So this muscle right here, the erector pili muscles, those are responsible for your goosebumps. And that's always asked on your nursing exams. And it'll be asked on my exams too. All the goosebumps you get on your skin, it's the erector pili muscle that contracts and produces that puckering sensation around all the hair follicles. And again, you can see the hair follicles. The hair follicles produce hairs that protect the skull, provide hairs that provide delicate touch sensations on general body surfaces. Like I said, if a little ant or something is crawling on your skin, or the wind blows, your hair moves on your arm or your legs or your head, and you can feel the sensation. Exocrine glands, okay, assist in thermal regulation. They can produce sweat, cool the body off. They excrete waste, and they lubricate the epidermis, keep it from drying out. And nails protect the tips of your fingers and toes. Okay. Functions of the integumentary system. We talked about this all the same functions: physical protection, regulation of body temperature, excretion of products, synthesis of products, sensation, and immune defense. What's one product that is synthesized by the integumentary system? What vitamin?
Vitamin D.
Vitamin D3, D, yes. It's synthesized by the integumentary system. That's why sunlight is important for vitamin D synthesis. Okay. Here's your picture of your dermis, your epidermis, your dermis, and then your subcutaneous layer. Okay. So this is the epidermis. These two layers right here. This is your epidermis right there. This is your dermis right here. And this is your subcutaneous layer or your hypodermis. Okay. Notice that there are only blood vessels in the dermis and hypodermal layer. There are no blood vessels in the epidermis. You have all these ridges. You follow these little ridges right here. Those are your epidermal ridges. Okay, that's what produces your fingerprint. Are those ridges? Okay, so the epidermis is the top layer, the most superficial layer. The dermis has two layers: the papillary layer and the reticular layer. The papillary layer here is pretty clear. There's not a whole bunch of reticular fibers in there. The reticular layer has a bunch of reticular fibers, making it very stringy. Okay, very supportive of the papillary layer and the epidermis. Okay, and then below the dermis, you have your subcutaneous layer or your hypodermis. That's where your sub-Q injections go, subcutaneous. That's where a hypodermic needle would be injected into. This has all your fat in there, your lipid storage, your major blood vessels that supply it, and so on. Okay? So that's how we're broken down. The epidermis, the dermis, papillary and reticular, and then the hypodermis or your subcutaneous layer. Okay? You have two types of skin in the body, in the entire body. Okay? You have thick skin and thin skin. Your thick skin is found in two places: on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. That's the only place where thick skin is found. Thick skin has 5 layers. Thin skin. Thin skin is found everywhere on your entire body except the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. And that has 4 layers. So thick skin has 5 layers. Thin skin is 4 layers. Okay. There are 4 cell types found in the epidermis. Okay. Epidermis has keratinocytes, melanocytes, Merkel cells, and Langerhans cells. Okay. Again, those are 4 cell types in the epidermis. Okay, so this is your epidermis, your top layer, your avascular layer. So keratinocytes, they produce keratin. Your skin is keratinized tissue. It's dead tissue on the surface, which is very protective. It's very thick and very rough. So one of the cells in your epidermis is keratinocytes, and they produce keratin. Okay, that makes it the superficial layer keratinized. It also gets melanocytes. Melanocytes are pigmented cells located deep in your epidermis again. Okay, they produce melanin, which controls skin color. Okay, a lot of students get 2 things mixed up: melanin and melatonin. They're 2 different things. Melanin is produced by melanocytes, and they produce pigmentation. Melatonin produces your circadian rhythm in your brain, produced by the pineal gland. Okay, that produces when you sleep, when you get tired, and how your body regulates night and day. So don't get melanin and melatonin mixed up. Melanocytes are in the epidermal layer, in the epidermis, and they produce the skin color. They produce a pigment. They produce a melanin, which is a pigment. Merkel cells are sensory cells. They transmit sensations from the epidermis down through the dermis, through the subcutaneous layer, to your nervous system, where it can be interpreted by the brain. And you have Langerhans cells. Langerhans cells are wandering macrophages. Remember, we talked about macrophages before. Macrophages destroy other cells, like your peroxisomes, your lysosomes. Those are like macrophages. Whatever it comes across, it eats. Bacteria, viruses, it swallows them up. And they wander. These ones aren't fixed in any particular system. They wander throughout the body. Okay? So the 4 cell types you need to know are keratinocytes, melanocytes, Merkel cells, and Langerhans cells, and what they do. Okay. These are the layers of epidermis. There's 5 layers, okay? One of these layers is in thick skin, and one is missing in thick skin. The stratum lucidium, this layer right here, is only in thick skin. This is missing in your thin skin. So going from the deeper part up, okay, the deepest layer is your stratum basale, like your basement membrane, your basal layer. So the stratum basale is the basic layer. the deepest one. Then you got your stratum spinosum, your stratum granulosum, your stratum lucidium, which is a very thin glass-like layer. But the stratum lucidium is the one that's found only in thick skin. So the stratum lucidium is only going to be found in two places in the body: palms of your hand, soles of your feet. And then the most superficial layer is the stratum corneum. That's what makes up the layers of the epidermis, those 5 layers, or 4 if it's not thick skin, if it's thin skin. Any questions so far? Every understanding?
So far.
So far, okay. We'll make it more complex, don't worry. All right. So layers of the epidermis, stratum basale, and the stratum basale, that's the most deepest layer. That's where your melanocytes are located, okay? Cells in this area are undergoing active reproduction. Those are the cells that are reproducing and moving upwards that are going to form all the different layers. The stratum spinosum, where your keratinocytes are bound together by desmosomes. Remember desmosomes. Desmosomes do what? Remember we talked about hemidesmosomes, desmosomes, gap junctions, polyglycans, and cellular cement, and cadhesion molecules. Desmosomes hold cells together. Okay, that's what creates flakes and dandruff, because it holds the cells together. That's what holds your skin intact, are these desmosomes. You don't want gaps in your skin. You want your skin to be fairly intact to prevent water loss, to prevent the entrance of pathogens, okay, to isolate the body from your physical environment. So desmosomes are the connecting points of cells where they adhere together. And the keratinocytes are bound by these desmosomes together, and they produce the keratin, which is the most superficial layer, the dead cell surface of your skin. That's where they're held together by desmosomes. Okay. The stratum granulosum is the 3rd layer, where keratinocytes produce a lot of keratin. Again, it's getting thicker and thicker and thicker so it can protect your body. It's a keratinized layer. The stratum corneum is the most superficial layer of the epidermis. Consists of interlocking, dehydrated, dead cells. Okay, so interlocking because of the desmosomes, dehydrated because they're all squamous and being squished out of them, and they're dead, there's no nuclei. Okay, so the surface of your skin cannot produce more cells. It produces from underneath. That's how scars heal. Okay, they flake off, new cells are produced from underneath and come up. If your cut is deep enough, where it goes through the stratum corneum, okay, it will always be a scar, because those layers cannot come back up and reproduce. The big thing to remember is the stratum corneum is dead cells. They don't function. All they do is protect. They're a thick, keratinized layer. It's just keratin. And they're interlocking. That's what holds them all together by those desmosomes that held the keratinocytes together when it made the keratin. Okay, here's your 5 layers again. This is in thick skin. Okay, so this is an example of thick skin. How do you know it's thick skin?
There's 5 layers.
There's 5 layers. Stratum lucidium. The stratum lucidium is only found in thick skin. So if you have a question and you see a slide like that and you got all those different 5 layers, you know it came from 1 or 2 areas. You know how to come from the palm of your hand or the soles of your feet, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only place it can come from. Everything else is thin skin. Okay? And it basically sums up what we've talked about. The deepest layer, the one closest to the dermis, is the stratum basale. So you have your dermis, you have your basement lamina, which is your deep layer, then you have your stratum basale, okay, which is your deepest basal layer, attached to the basal lamina, so it holds it to the connective tissue, and it contains your epidermal stem cells. Okay, this is where you see all the stem cells here on the bottom. This is where these cells can reproduce as they move up. Okay, form into keratinocytes, produce keratin, and then they die off. Contains melanocytes. Melanocytes produce melanin, which is pigments, and Merkel cells, which are offer sensation. Okay, stratum spinosum. Keratinocytes are bound together by the macula adherens attached to the tonal fibrils of the cytoskeleton. That's your desmosomes. Okay. Keratinocytes, some keratinocytes divide this layer, and Langerhans cells are present, and melanocytes are present. Langerhans cells are, what are Langerhans cells? Langerhans cells are your macrophages. Those ones that go around, and a bacteria, a pathogen, a virus, anything passes that stratum corneum layer, it eats it. It dissolves it. So it doesn't continue to the rest of the body. Then the stratum granulosum, okay? Cell membranes become thicker, organelles disintegrate, and the cells start to die right here. Okay? Stratum lucidium is a very thin glass-like layer. Okay, it's a very glassy layer, very thin. Okay, see right here? I mean, this is your stratum corneum. This is all your stratum corneum, this huge thick layer here. But this little thin layer right here, this little pink layer that runs right along there, you can barely see it over here. That's your stratum lucidium. It's a very thin, glass-like layer found only in thick skin. And then the stratum corneum is your huge thick layer on top, all your dead cells, multiple layers of flattened dead cells, interlocking keratinocytes from the desmosomes. Typically relatively dry. Skin's usually dry, water resistant, but not waterproof. Okay? If you ever work in a morgue and the body's underwater for 6 months, you know it is not waterproof. Okay, that water soaks through. And those are not nice autopsies. Permits slow water loss by insensible perspiration for heat control. All right. Any questions on the 5 layers of the epidermis? Is anything lagging tonight?
Only every now and then.
No? Okay. Everybody's gone to the house, so there's no one on the internet, so I think that's pretty good. This is me and the dog tonight, so. He doesn't use the internet that much. All right, we talked about epidermal ridges. Okay? The stratum germatatum, the basale layer, forms the epidermal ridges. That's where the epidermis and the dermis meet. And we have all those up and down ridges up here. Remember it came up like that? This is your epidermis, and this is your dermis. And these are your epidermal ridges. Epidermal ridges form fingerprints. Okay? Those are the dermal papillae, and they extend into the dermis, creates ridges we call fingerprints. All right. Here's your epidermal ridges, right here. You can follow it along, how it extends into the dermis. This is your epidermal ridge, and this pattern is unique, and it does form your fingerprints. So that's your epidermal ridges. This is the dermal papillae that extend up into it. Okay, you have your arteries and veins that come up into it, and cutaneous layers. Again, you have this is your epidermal layer right here. This is your epidermis, and this is your dermis, and below that is your hypodermis. Sorry. Okay, remember that the dermis has 2 layers, the papillary layer and the reticular. The easy way to tear it apart is the reticular layer is full of reticular fibers. That's where your strength is, that's where your elasticity is. The papillary layer is a pretty clear layer. And everybody remember what these little yellow things are called? What are these little yellow cells right here?
Adipose.
Adipose, they're fat cells, perfect. Okay, so the basic organization of the epidermis, the thickness of the epidermis, especially the stratum corneum, that's the thickest layer of the epidermis, changes radically depending on the location sampled. Your thing can be a lot thicker in different areas. Okay, that's a really good picture here that shows you how your fingerprints are formed. You see your epidermis, your dermal papillae. So epidermis, dermis, and these are your epidermal ridges. And that forms your fingerprint. And again, you can see how thick the stratum corneum is, much thicker than all the other layers of the skin. Okay. And again, that's your fingerprints. You got sweat gland ducts that pour there, so your fingertips get sweaty. And these epidermal ridges form your fingerprints. Forms a unique pattern for each person. Skin color. Skin color can be due to dermal blood supply. Okay. If you cut off the blood supply to a certain area, okay, the skin starts to turn blue. Okay. That's lack of oxygen from the blood. So dermal blood supply, thickness of the stratum corneum determines skin color, and various concentrations of carotene and melanin. Okay, that's under genetic control. Melanin is the main pigment that determines your skin color. So the dermal blood supply, reduction in blood flow results in a pale color. If someone gets scared and the blood drains from their face, the face becomes pale. Sustained reduction in blood flow results in cyanosis. If you're working on a patient in the emergency room, okay, and you look at their fingertips and you look at their lips, those are the two places you look to make an overall, a real quick assessment of oxygen perfused to the body. If the lips start to turn blue or the bed of their fingernails start to turn blue, you're in serious trouble. They're not getting oxygen through their body. I mean, I realize you put a pulse oximeter on there, you give them a measurement, but your initial reduction, if you see cyanosis, you see their fingernails turning blue or their lips, you get oxygen on them because they're not getting oxygen to the extremities of their body. And that's called cyanosis. And I guarantee you'll see that term on your nursing exams and on my exams, okay? Cyanosis means cyan. Cyan is a blue color. Cyanosis is the whatever it is turning to a blue color. All right. So that's cyanosis. That's from your dermal blood supply. Carotene. Carotene is derived from carrots, corn, squash. That can convert to vitamin A. Vitamin A is needed for the synthesis of visual pigments in the eyes, in the photoreceptors of your eyes. We'll go over that in one of the chapters also. All right. So vitamin A is needed to synthesize the visual pigments. That allows your eyes to see in the color ranges for your cones. Melanin. Melanin is the main pigment in the skin. Do not get melanin confused with melatonin. It happens all the time. 15% of the class is going to tell me that melatonin produces skin pigmentation, and it doesn't. Melatonin is your circadian rhythm, nights or days. Melanin is your pigmentation. Melanocytes produce melanin. It's produced and stored in melanocytes. Creates natural skin color and tans. It protects the skin against UV radiation. That's why ultraviolet radiation causes tan, because the melanocytes are stimulated to produce darker pigmentation to prevent the penetration of ultraviolet radiation, which can cause skin cancer. So far, so good. All right, so melanin. Differences in skin color is a result of varying level of melanocyte activity, not in varying number of melanocytes. Again, a nursing board question. All the people with different skin tones, different skin colors, it's not because they have a different number of melanocytes. Everybody has the same number of melanocytes. What is their activity, how much melanin is being produced by those melanocytes. So every person, regardless of their color, has the same number of melanocytes. That's not what causes it. It's the activity, how much melanin is produced. Albinism is an inherited disease that has lack of melanin production. Individuals with this condition have a normal amount of melanocytes. So someone who has an albino will have the same number of melanocytes as everybody else, but the cells don't produce melanin. Okay? It's all about the melanin production, how active the melanocytes are. Okay? Everyone has the same number of melanocytes. Does that make sense? All right, cool. All right, look at a light microscope picture. You see the melanocytes, which are in the strata basale. The strata basale is the deepest layer of the epidermis. Okay, again, you can see the epidermis, you see the dermis. This is in the strata basale. The strata basale is your deepest layer of your epidermis. Okay, you can see the melanin production if you look inside of it, and you see the basal lamina. The basal lamina connects the epidermis to the dermis. All right, it's a little bit easier to see in here because I can blow it up a little bigger. But you see all the little black dots here. That's melanin. Okay, and this is your melanocyte. This is a cell that produces melanin. Everybody has those cells. Your skin color is determined by the activity of the melanocytes, how much melanin they're producing. So far, so good. Cool. All right, so melanocyte activity. Exposure to UV light produces an increase in melanocyte activity. Increases the rate of melanin formation, and tanning begins. Repeated exposure to UV light. Okay, so multiple tanning beds. Staying out in the sun. Repeated exposure results in long-term epidermal and dermal damage. So it damages the epidermis and the dermis. Results in abnormal connective tissue structure. It breaks down the connective tissue. The reticular fibers break down. Results in premature wrinkling and results in epidermal skin cancer. Okay, so I'm not a big fan of tanning beds. Okay, repeat exposure causes damage to both the epidermal and dermal layers. Abnormal connective tissue, which causes wrinkling, and it can result in epidermal skin cancer. Okay, vitamin D formation. Your integumentary system, one of the things that the skin synthesizes. UV light converts a cholesterol-related precursor, converts to vitamin D. Vitamin D1 undergoes change in the liver and the kidneys. Vitamin D1 converts to the active form of vitamin D, which is calcitrol. So vitamin D is your precursor that build up into calcitrol. Calcitrol is the active vitamin that the body needs, and it's made from vitamin D that is converted by UV light in the skin. Okay, then it goes in the liver and the kidneys, and it produces calcitrol. This is the active vitamin in the body, is calcitrol. That's what vitamin D produces. Stratum lucidum is one layer that's present in thick skin and not in thick skin. Dermis is the layer before or just below the epidermis, and the dermal papillae are what form the epidermal ridges, which form your fingerprints. So the dermis consists of two layers we talked about. We talked about the papillary layer and the reticular layer. The papillary layer is your clear layer. There's not a whole lot in it. It's really clear. And it's the superficial dermis. It's the one on top. Reticular layer has all these fibers in it. Okay, all these reticular layers form your support, your structure. And you can see all these different fibers in reticular layer, and that's a deep dermis. So you get superficial dermis and your deep dermis. Okay, and here we go. This is your papillary layer. This is your epidermal ridges right here. And you can see your division. All this. This is your papillary layer. It's pretty clear. And this is your reticular layer. All these reticular fibers are inside of it. And you see how thick this is and how supporting it's going to be of the epidermis. Okay. So remember, your dermis layer consists of your papillary layer and your reticular layer. Papillary layer is on top, reticular layer is on the bottom. Okay. So your papillary layer, that's your clear layer, the most superficial. Loose connective tissue, dermal papillae, your fingerprints, capillaries, so your plexuses that form blood supplies to the epidermis, and your nerve axons, where you get your sensation from. That's in the papillary layer. That's the clear layer. Okay. Reticular layer is an interwoven network of dense, irregular connective tissue. So again, you got a whole network of this very dense, irregular connective tissue. That's what forms your structure, your support. Inside the reticular layer is where your hair follicles are. It's where your sweat glands are, when the sweat ducts go up to the surface, and your sebaceous glands. So all your exocrine glands are in the reticular layer. Okay. Wrinkles. Everybody's worried about wrinkles, Botox, and all that good stuff nowadays. Okay. Wrinkles are the interwoven collagen fibers provide tensile strength. Okay. The elastic fibers allow the skin to stretch, and then when it stretches, it recoils and rebounds. When the skin loses that ability, when the reticular layer, when those fibers break down and the skin can no longer recoil when it's stretched, that's what forms wrinkles. Okay. What's one of the big things that damages it is UV light, tanning beds. UV light, that's what damages the reticular layer. That's what causes a lot of wrinkles. It can also be with age, you increase your wrinkles, and change in hormone levels. Okay. Now, Botox doesn't change your reticular fibers, Doesn't do any of that. What Botox does is Botox is a poison. It stops the nerve from triggering. So the nerve doesn't respond. So you can't contract the muscles, so the muscles don't, when you get, decreases the wrinkles. That's how Botox works. And it's an extremely dangerous poison, but it works very well for that. Okay? Stretch marks. Okay, anyone that's been pregnant knows the fun and joy of stretch marks. Okay? Extensive stressing, that can turn into pregnancy or excessive weight gain with, what's the disease I'm trying to think of? Dang. I'll think of it in a second. But it does cause stretch marks as it expands the stomach. Gosh, I don't want to blank on the disease. And it causes your reticular fibers to break. So with pregnancy, and as your stomach expands, the reticular fibers in that dermal layer break. Once they break, they can't come back. It can't recoil, so you get stretch marks. Okay, the skin wrinkles and cause result in stretch marks. Lines of cleavage. Okay, that's not the cleavage you're thinking about. Okay, lines of cleavage are collagen and elastic fibers that have a tendency to organize themselves in a parallel pattern. If you're going to make an incision in someone to take out a small skin cancer, something like that on the skin, you want to cut along the lines of cleavage. You want your surgeon to know where these lines of cleavage are. It's like a piece of wood. Pieces of wood have grain in it, right? You cut along the grain. If you don't, the wood shatters. Same thing with the skin. If you cut through the cleavage line, it shatters, it doesn't heal right. You want to cut along the grain, just like with wood. You want to cut along the cleavage lines. Certain areas of the body, there are specific cleavage lines due to stress and specific types of movement. Okay, when they do C-sections, they want to cut along the cleavage lines to leave what's called a bikini scar. So it heals up, they still wear a bikini and you don't have this big scar. They don't go against the cleavage lines. Now, I understand certain traumas, car accidents and that, you don't have a choice. I mean, the damage is already done. You just sew up what you got and scars will be left. But if you have a choice, you want to cut along the lines of cleavage. It reduces scar formation. It does not cause extensive damage to the fibers. Because if the fibers all run this direction, okay, if all your fibers are running this way, okay, and you make a cut, this is your blade right here. If you make a cut, actually, let me do it. I can do different colors here, can't I? This is pretty cool. I like this little iPad. If you make a cut like that, you didn't damage the fibers. And when you go to suture it up, you're going to get good healing. Now, if you make a cut like this, you just cut all those fibers in half and they will not go back. Then you got damage. Then you got keloids, you got scar formation, you got all kinds of problems. So you want to, these are called lines of cleavage, and you want to cut along those lines of cleavage. And that's what it looks like. Those are your lines of cleavage. Any surgeon who knows their stuff knows these lines of cleavage, and they know where they want to cut and how they want to angle their blades in the different areas. Like I said, sometimes you have no choice. You get trauma cases and the cuts are there and they're all cut through. You don't have a choice. You just got to do the best you can. But if you're doing some kind of surgical procedure and you have a choice, you want to cut along those lines to make sure you don't damage the fibers and get good healing with your scar formation. All right, the dermis. Again, the dermis contains a network of blood vessels, lymph vessels, and nerve fibers. Epidermis does not. The epidermis is avascular, has no blood vessels. All the nutrients and supplies come from the blood vessels, arteries and veins in the dermis. Okay, so you have blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerve fibers. Okay, blood supply to the skin. Okay, arteries and veins form the cutaneous plexus. A plexus is a group of nerves, a group of blood that come up and join together. It's where your arteries and veins meet. That's your plexus. Plexus like an interwoven, like a spider web. That's a plexus of veins or arteries. Smaller blood vessels from the subpapillary plexus, okay, form these plexuses. Their function is thermal regulation, either keep heat in if the muscles contract and keep them away from this outer surface, or let heat out if muscles relax and they get close towards the outer surface of the skin. Blood flow to the skin is regulated to help maintain constant flow to other tissues of the body. And again, here's our famous picture again. I showed this about 6 times now. I'll probably show it about 6 more. So do you think you'll see that on your exam?
Yes.
Okay. Should I tap my foot 3 times or something like that? I mean, you will see this picture again. And you should know everything on it. Okay. You can see the cutaneous membrane. This is your epidermis right here. This is your dermis. And this is your hypodermis. Okay. You can see the papillary plex, the subcutaneous papillary plexuses right here, where the artery and blood vessels meet. You can see your major arteries and veins right down here. Okay. We're going to go through the rest of this in a little bit, but this is your artery and vein, and this is your cutaneous plexus. And it feeds up into the dermal layer to form your capillary loop of your subpapillary plexus. Those are smaller ones. Your main ones are your subcu layer or your hypodermic layer. Okay. We'll go through all the different structures in this picture. Nerve supplies to the skin. How does it function? It controls blood flow to the skin. Nerves control the smooth muscles around your blood vessels. Okay. If your body's cold, the nerves are going to tell those smooth muscles to contract. Keep the blood vessels away from the surface, keep the heat in your body. Okay. If your body's hot, it's allow those smooth muscles around those blood vessels to relax, open up, the blood gets close to the surface of the body, heat gets adjusted out. Okay, so nerves control your blood flow to the skin. They adjust gland secretion rates, how much you sweat. If you don't believe that, okay, if you get nervous during an anatomy test, are your hands going to sweat? It's because you get nervous, because your nerves are controlling your gland secretion rate and your palms become sweaty. Okay, monitor sensory reception. It knows if it's hot. If you put your hand on a burner, it knows that it's hot. If you step on the Lego, okay, it knows that it hurts. Okay, it can monitor sensory reception to your skin and your leg pulls back. Examples from nerve supply to the skin are your tactile corpuscles. Okay, your tactile corpuscles are your light touch receptors. Okay, the Ruffini corpuscles. Ruffini corpuscles are your stretch receptors, where your skin's being stretched. And lamellated corpuscles. Laminated are deep pressure and vibration receptors. Lamellation means, just like in bone, means concentric circles. These are your lamellated corpuscles. That's what they look like. Remember, we did that with our bone, with our compact bone, with lamellated structures. Laminated just means a concentric circle, like circles of a tree. Okay, so tactile corpuscles, your very light touch. Ruffini corpuscles are when your legs stretch. Lamellated corpuscles are your deep pressure and vibration receptors. Okay, again, here's your tactile corpuscles. You can see them right here. This is your tactile corpuscles, your light touch. These are your laminated. Remember, laminated meant what? All these little circles. And if you can see clear enough in there, you can see all those little concentric circles, okay, on that laminated corpuscle. And those are the nerves in there. And it doesn't have a picture of Ruffini, but Ruffini is like a eyeball shape. You ever see that show? What's that cartoon? The kid with the football head. Hey Arnold, something like that. Okay. That's a Ruffini corpuscle. That head just like that. That's what they look like. You can tell I got grandkids. You know, all those shows. All right, subcutaneous layer. So epidermis, dermis. Dermis has a papillary layer, reticular layer. Below the reticular layer. So epidermis, dermis, hypodermis. Hypodermis is your subcutaneous layer. It's also called the hypodermic layer. Okay, that's where your sub-Q injections go as a nurse. Hypodermic needles get injected into there. That's why they're given that name. So the subcutaneous layer is deep to the dermis. It's the one below the dermis. Okay, it's also referred to as a superficial fascia. Fascia is all the term inside your inner parts that hold everything together. Okay, it's not technically part of the integumentary system, but most people kind of include it because it's there. And it helps to stabilize the integumentary system. That's its function. All right, again, here's your, so you got your epidermis, you got your dermis, and this is your hypodermis right here, all this layer. Okay, subcutaneous layer consists of adipose tissues. Adipose tissue is fat. Adipose tissue serves two functions. It cushions and it stores energy, stores fat, and break down for energy later on. And it has the major blood vessels are in your subcutaneous layer. That's why when you draw blood, you give an injection, you go into a blood vessel, you want to go into the subcutaneous layer. If you stick your needle into the epidermis, you're not going to get any blood. It's avascular. Okay, so due to location of the vessels, we have terms like hypodermic needles and sub-Q injections, subcutaneous injections. Accessory structure. So any questions on the epidermis, the dermis, or the hypodermis? Everybody's good with that? All right. Accessory structures. Let me get it. Okay, accessory structures include hair follicles, sebaceous glands, sweat glands, and nails. We talked a little bit about each of those. Where are the sebaceous glands located? Associated with what structure? They're associated with your hair follicles. They're the ones that produce your mucus, your oily substance. Your sweat glands, just up in the dermis, they go through the sweat gland, the duct, and secrete their exocrine secretion onto the skin, which is a watery substance. All right, so here is a gland. You can see by looking at this gland right here, it's associated with a hair follicle. So that is going to a sebaceous gland. That's how you can tell. So on your nursing exam, on the thing, if you see a gland and it's associated with a hair follicle, it's a sebaceous gland. If you have a gland right here, this gland right here is not associated with a hair follicle. That's a sweat gland. This produces a watery substance to the surface of the skin through the duct. This secretes a mucus secretion, oily substance along the hair. Okay, so there's your sebaceous gland. This is a sweat gland, and this is a sweat gland here too. That one's even labeled. And you can see the duct where it comes up. This is your sweat gland duct. And your sebaceous gland secretes along the hair follicle. Okay. So hair follicles and hair are found everywhere except palms of your hand, soles of your feet, sides of fingers and toes, your lips, and certain portions of genitalia, like the glans penis, the clitoris, the labia minor, and the inner surface of the labia major. Okay? Those are the surfaces without hair. So the two things you should realize is palms of your hands and soles of your feet. What do those two things have in common?
A fifth layer of skin.
Perfect, fifth layer skin. These two areas are the only areas in your body that have thick skin. The stratum lucidium. Stratum. Okay. So palms and soles of feet are the only place in your body that has 5 layers. Okay. Done. There we go. Okay, hair follicles and hair follicles and hair structure, the hair papilla and the hair bulb. Okay, you have your matrix, which supports everything around it. You have soft keratin and hard keratin that support the hair structures. Hard keratin makes up inside the hair, the soft keratin's around it. You have an internal root sheath and an external root sheath. External root sheath surrounds the follicle. The internal root sheath surrounds the hair as it comes up. You have the glassy membrane, which is stratum lucidum, the 5th layer in those 2 layers, and you have a connective tissue sheath around it. You have those things around your hair follicles. Okay, so there's your sebaceous gland. Okay, and we talked about this muscle right here. This is your erector pili muscles, and this muscle is responsible for what?
Goosebumps.
Goosebumps. This is what causes goosebumps when this thing contracts. The erector pili muscle. Okay, you have a connective tissue sheath around the outside. This is the hair bulb. And this is the hair papilla, where the blood vessels enter. You got the hair root inside, which is what the hair is composed of. You got the exposed shaft of the hair shaft, and you got the boundary between the hair shaft and the hair root as this matrix system here around it. Okay. Take a cross section of it. You can see the different structures. You can do the internal root sheath, the external root sheath. Okay, the glassy membrane, which is this real thin layer right here in between. This is your thin layer, it's a glassy membrane. This is your internal root sheath here. This is your external root sheath here around it. Okay, and this is your connective tissue sheath surrounding the entire hair follicle. Okay, that's what a cross section looks like through the hair follicle. Okay. Again, that's a light microscope picture, the same thing. Remember we talked about cortex and medulla on any organ. We told you the cortex is going to be the outside, medulla is going to be the inside. Same with the hair follicle, no matter what we're talking about. You see the papilla, which is where the blood vessel comes in, the matrix which supports it. Okay, you got adipose tissue all around it. You got your cuticle of your hair follicle, the glassy membrane is a real thin layer membrane, internal, external root sheath, and then the hair shaft as it comes up. Hair follicles and hair stem. Functions of hair. Hair protects you from UV light. Acts as insulation. Okay, guards your entrances to your nose and ears. Movement of the hair sends impulses via nerves to the brain. Presence of root hair plexus, such as when a bug is crawling on your arm. Lets you know that's bending, it lets you know that it's present. Contraction of your rector pili muscles we talked about, of the hair follicles. When these muscles contract, this produces your goosebumps. Causes the hairs to stand up. Okay, again, here's our famous picture, and here is the erector pili muscle. This muscle attaches the hair follicle to the reticular fibers, and when it pulls, it allows that hair follicle to stand up, producing goosebumps. Okay, there's different types of hair. There's vellus hair, intermediate hair, and terminal hair. Vellus hair covers most of your body. It's a very thin, very small hair. Intermediate hair covers your arms and legs. Terminal hair covers your head, your eyebrows, and your eyelashes. It's your thicker, longer hair. Okay, there's 3 different types. Hair color is due to variations in melanin production by the melanocytes. More melanin creates darker hair. Melanin production decreases with age. Hair becomes gray or white. Decreased production results in gray hair. Lack of melanin and the presence of air bubbles in the hair shaft with age results in white hair.
So
Air bubble.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, sure.
So back to that, if you can go back to that other slide.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see, decreased production results in gray. Okay, so with that being said, I do know somebody who, she says that instead of getting gray hair, she gets like a really dark black hair. Is that like?
Yeah, if you
Great.
dye it.
No, so she doesn't dye it.
No, the older you get, the grayer your hair becomes.
Okay, because
No.
her hair's super light, but she feels like instead of her getting gray hair, she's actually getting black hair.
No, it won't. It won't. The melanin production will starts to decrease with age, and that's what controls your hair color.
Okay.
Yeah, younger people. I mean, as you're younger, 20s, 30s or so, you'll still get dark hair. But as you get older, the melanin decreases, and your hair is going to become lighter in color.
But how do you get air bubbles?
Air bubbles are where the hair starts to decrease. It gets thinner, and air bubbles get incorporated into it as it forms. It's just because the connective tissue and the sheath start to break down, and oxygen and stuff from the body that the cells using for nutrients get incorporated through those areas now. And you get little air bubbles and it turns it more white. That's with more advanced ages. Okay. Any other questions on it? Perfect.
There's a question in the chat.
So hair color is influenced by, what's that?
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, I know. So why do some people hair go? Because of this reason right here: genetics, hormones, and environmental factors. Everybody's exposed to different factors. Stress, things like that, cause change in hair color. Change in your hormones will cause it, and people have different genetics. So everybody's going to be different. Some people go gray at 20. Some people go gray at 70, 75. Okay, and it's due to genetics, hormones, and environmental factors. Okay, that's what different people are different with hair color. Growth and replacement of the hair follicles. Each hair follicle goes through a growth cycle. Has an active stage. Hair grows about 0.3 millimeters a day, so a third of a millimeter. And hairs last for 2 to 5 years. Okay, then it gets replaced by another hair follicle. The resting stage, hair loses its attachment to the follicle and then becomes a clear hub. So when the hair breaks loose of its follicle, it becomes a hair club and will die off and fall out. Club hair is lost and a replacement hair is produced. Okay. So the active phase, follow the progression of the hair. The active phase lasts 2 to 5 years. During the active phase, the hair grows about 0.3 millimeters a day, a third of a millimeter. The hair follicle begins to undergo regression and transitions to the resting phase, where it stops growing. During the resting phase, the hair loses its attachment to the follicle and becomes a club hair. You can see where the hair shaft here is attached to the follicle, and the shaft hair here, and the hair shaft here is not attached to the follicle. Okay, that's when it becomes a club hair, when it's no longer attached to this follicle right here. When the follicle reactivation occurs, another hair starts to grow, and the club hair is lost, and the hair produces a replacement hair. And that's the life cycle of your hair. Okay. Again, glands in the skin. You have sebaceous glands and you have sweat glands. Sweat glands, okay, associated with the skin, produce a watery substance. You have apocrine glands, ceremonous glands, mammary glands, and Merrican glands. Ceremonous glands are a type of apocrine gland. Mammary glands are also a type of apocrine gland. Gland function. Glands lubricate the epidermis, they excrete waste, and they assist in thermal regulation. Okay? So basically a gland has your 3 functions. Okay? It lubricates the epidermis, excretes waste, and assists in thermal regulation. Okay. Sebaceous glands, okay, secrete sebum to lubricate the skin. Okay, holocrine secretions. Remember what a holocrine secretion was? Holocrine, where the entire cell destroys and the environment and the products are released. So secrete sebum to lubricate the skin, and undergoes sebaceous glands undergo holocrine secretion. Okay, it can be either simple alveolar or simple branched alveolar. We're talking about the different types. They're found all over the body except where there's thick skin. Palms of your hands, soles of your feet. Okay? They're found in high concentrations on your forehead, your face, and your upper back. Where do you sweat the most? Forehead, face, and upper back. Okay? If the ducts become blocked, that's when acne may occur, because then the blood cannot excrete its waste. Okay, so sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are your oily substance associated with hair. Okay, that it produces a lipid substance called sebum that coats the hair shaft and the epidermis as it comes out. Provides lubrication and some antibacterial action. Sweat glands. You have apocrine glands, high concentration in your armpits and your nipple regions for apocrine glands. They produce an odor secretion. The secretions contain pheromones. Okay? They're secretions that babies smell in order to detect and feel safe with mom. Okay? You produce a sweat, the babies understand those pheromones, and that's what babies recognize their moms. Males have these secretions as well. Okay? Mechanism of secretion is merocrine. That's the type of secretion they undergo, American secretion. Okay? American glands, also known as exocrine glands, are found all over the body. They're found in high concentration on the palms and palms of your hands and soles of your feet. Okay, so that's where your American glands are. When your hands become sweaty, like during an exam, soles of your feet become sweaty, those are due to the American glands. They're the ones that are found on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet where you have thick skin. And they produce sweating for cooling purposes, to cool the body down. All right, so here's your sweat glands. Okay, they produce watery solution by American secretion. Okay. They flush epidermal surface, perform special functions. So apocrine sweat glands, they're limited distribution. Okay, so this is your apocrine sweat glands here. They produce a viscous secretion of complex composition. So this is your oily substance. Okay, possible function communication through pheromones, things like that. Strong influence by hormones, American secretion mechanism. So they creep through American secretion. American sweat glands are widespread throughout the body, produce thin secretions that are mostly water. Okay. Controlled by your nervous system. They're important in thermoregulation and have some antibacterial action. So the ceremoneous glands secrete waxy serum, also into your external ear canal that is the buildup in your ear. And the mammary glands, apocrine glands, specialized for milk production. All right, sweat glands. Yeah, mammary glands or ceremoneous glands. Mammary glands are a special type of apocrine gland. They produce milk under the control of hormones from the pituitary gland. That's what activates it to form milk in the mammary glands. Ceremoneous glands, a special type of apocrine gland also. They're found only in the ear canal. Okay, they produce serum, which is earwax. And they provide minimal protection associated with the ear. So those are different types of glands. All right, let's see who's paying attention. We're going to start. We're going to start with that line right there. What is that?
Which line?
Hair follicle, right? Hair shaft. Okay. The next one is little dots right there. Those are little, that's where the duct comes up, and they are pores, okay, of the sweat gland duct. Okay. What kind of nerve is this one pointing to?
Tactical.
Can you remember? What was it? Okay, that was your tactile corpuscles. Okay. What's this one pointing to? What type of gland is the next one pointing to? What glands are associated with hair follicles?
Sebaceous gland.
Sebaceous glands. Okay, and what's that muscle that it's pointing to from the hair follicle?
Erector pili.
Erector pili muscle. Perfect.
Are they
And what comes up from this other gland? This is a
Sweat gland duct.
sweat gland duct. Perfect. Okay. And this is pointing to what part of this?
Hair follicle.
That's your hair follicle. All right. What kind of nerve is this one pointing to? This has a concentric circles. This is your lamellated corpuscle. Okay. The next one is pointing to,
Nerve fibers.
these are just free nerve
Sweat
fibers
gland.
are running through the plexus, right? Those are your nerve fibers. Those are free nerve fibers as they run through it. And what kind of gland is this next one?
Sweat gland.
Sweat
Nerve
gland. Perfect. And the red one is a
artery.
artery. Blue one is a
Vein.
vein. And together that's called your, where's it located? What layer?
Hypodermis.
Right, hypodermis or subcutaneous. And that's your subcutaneous or cutaneous plexus. And those yellow things are
Adipose.
adipose tissues, fat cells. And going on the bottom here, we're gonna start back on this side, right over here. That is your what?
So
Subcutaneous.
Those are subcutaneous. Your subcutaneous layer. Ah, went too far. Ah, hit the wrong button. All right, we'll go back real quick here. All right, let me catch up. All right, whoops. All right, so that layer is your subcutaneous layer. Let's do it. It's on the same key. This is your reticular layer. What's above the reticular layer?
Papillary layer.
Papillary layer, perfect. And those two layers make up the
Dermis,
dermis. And above the dermis, we have the
epidermis.
epidermis. Okay, and these blood vessels form your,
Capillary loop.
that's right, perfect. They form the subloop of the capillary loops or your subpapillary plexus. Perfect. All right, any questions on that? We all good with the epidermis of the skin? All right, go about 5 more minutes and take a break. All right, so nails. The function of nails provide protection for the tips of your fingers and your toes. The structure of nails. They have a free end, a lateral nail fold, a lunula, an epinecium, and a hyponychium. And we'll go over each one of those structures. The direction of growth of the nail is outward. You have a free edge. Your lateral folds to the side. The nail is the main body. Lunula, okay, is the edge of the nail where it comes from the nail bed. The epinecium is right at the surface of the skin along the nail bed. You have a proximal nail fold, which is just above the epinecium. So you got your lateral nail fold to the side here, and then your proximal nail fold on the end. And your epinecium is right where the nail bed sits, where it connects to the skin. That's the epinecium. Okay, looking at a side view. Phalanx is the bone, your phalanges, that's your phalanx. You have your dermis and your epidermis. So epidermis is the outer layer, then below that is your dermis. Then you got your hyponychium, which is the skin just below underneath the nail bed. You have the nail body, and you have your lunula, which just sticks out from the skin. You have your epinecium, which is right of the skin layer, right as the nail comes out of the bed. Your proximal nail fold to the side, and then the nail root is inside the skin. That's a side view of the nail. Okay, epidermis, when you age, epidermis becomes thinner, the dermis becomes thinner, the number of Langerhans cells decrease. What are Langerhans cells? What do they do?
They're macrophages.
Perfect, wandering macrophages, exactly. So your chance of getting infection becomes greater as you get older. So the epidermis becomes thinner, the dermis becomes thinner, your Langerhans cells decrease, vitamin D production decreases, melanocyte activity decreases, and glandular activity decreases. So as you get older, you can't stay in the heat as long. Because your glandular activity decreases and you can't dissipate heat as well as you used to. Okay, also hair follicles stop functioning. You lose more hair. Skin repair slows down. Blood supply to the dermis decreases. Makes it difficult to dissipate heat. So exposure to sun, like heat or sauna, can cause dangerous high body temperatures as you get older. Hair and body fat distribution begins to fade, and that's due to decrease in sex hormones. So everything starts to go downhill. All right, so that's what it looks like as you age. You got fewer active melanocytes, so pale skin, reduced tolerance for sun exposure. You get fewer active follicles, so you get thin, sparser hair. You get reduced skin repair. So skin repair slows down a lot. Decreased immunity. Number of dendritic cells decrease at 50%, seen at age 21. So you have decreased immunity from the skin. You get a thinner epidermis and a thinner dermis. So the thinner epidermis slows your repairs down, decreased vitamin D production, and the reduced number of Langerhans cells. Reduced sweat gland activity, so you tend to overheat. You have a thin dermis along with thin epidermis. You get wrinkling due to fiber loss in the dermis, your reticular layer. Reduced blood supply. slow healing, reduced ability to lose heat again, and a dry epidermis due to the sweat glands decreasing. Okay, and a change in distribution of fat and hair due to reduction in the sex hormone level.